Steve, former lieutenant with UPD, is now a consultant in. Would we say a consultant in the
sure
in law enforcement?
Certainly for us.
I got to ask you, what is your take on this? There are cities all across the country that are crying foul right now, saying, "Don't pass this." New York City, it'll cause big problems with New York City if concealed weapons are allowed in the city based on this legislation.
Okay, so New York City, we'll get into that because that's one of them. So,
but it's not just New York City; it's
right.
cities, and not necessarily all blue states either.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, an interesting thing about New York City. So New York State's a home rule state. So New York City is, and this is, I think, something that's going to have to be sort of hashed out along the way. Will this federal law supersede what New York City's laws? Because the way it works in New York State now is New York City is a home rule. So if you have a pistol permit, a concealed carry pistol permit in New York State, that does not allow you to go into the 5 boroughs. You're unlicensed. So will this supersede that? In other words, can anybody just now go to New York City?
I believe that this legislation would
it very well could. I've read the legislation. It's
Yeah.
like 2 paragraphs basically.
Yeah.
And I think it was written vague on purpose.
And the reason for the reason is so that you could carry in a place like New York City. I mean,
Sure.
I almost feel like they're eyeing New York City. I find some legislators on this.
Well, go ahead. No, I was going to chime in with another question. Go ahead.
So I'll be honest with you. I think that the national carry, if you will, is a good idea in theory. I really do. I think, however, in order to really make it work properly, we have to look at the process in which people obtain concealed carry permits right now. So in New York State, and I can speak New York State is a great example.
Yeah.
In New York State, depending on the county you live in, increases or decreases your likelihood of getting a concealed carry permit. So, like I said, if you go to New York City and you try to get a concealed carry permit, I don't care if you got a reference from the Pope and a letter from Epstein's mother, you're not getting a permit. That's it. You're not getting one. However, if you go to a more rural county, maybe you go upstate, you go up around Lake Champlain, you're probably going to get one. Because what happens is in New York State, in order to get one, you have to give a specific reason as to why you think you need one. In other words, you've been threatened before, you carry money for work. Other states, to get one, you just have to prove that you're not exempt from it. In other words, you're a felon. So it really goes from one end to another.
I got to tell you, in some states, it's really, really easy.
Well, it's certainly easier, and in a lot of states, what they do, like there's a lot of reciprocity with pistol permits. So New York State, of course, recognizes nobodies because that's typical New York behavior. But other states, like say Utah recognizes, I think, like 30 or 40 of them. So if you got a Utah pistol permit, you can carry in any of those listed states. Yeah. And what Utah has done, what a lot of people have done is people in Pennsylvania that are gun dealers or Bass Pro Shops that do the classes get certified to teach the UCA course so that you don't have to travel to that state. So as long as you've got that certificate that says, I've taken Utah's certification safety course, you take it, you mail them the money in the mail, you're going to get a Utah pistol permit in the mail. And even though you're not a resident of the state, you never have been, you don't even visit there.
How do you get on a plane? You got to put your weapon in.
So I have traveled.
Stow it?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And
so
it's the same for law enforcement. When you were a police officer, could you carry in another state?
Okay, so it's done in different ways. Under federal law, police and George Bush signed this into law. It's called H.R. 218, which essentially says that if you're retired law enforcement, as long as you qualify with that gun every year, you get a card from your agency, you can carry anywhere in the country. And that's the other thing that I have. Is that
just law enforcement? Could it be security?
It's just law enforcement.
Okay. What about the guys that are, Whitney Houston was in the movie, and what's his name? The actor was her
bodyguard.
Bodyguard. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Well, your bodyguard has to have a gun, right?
And again, I think what you'll see a lot of those people is, I think the way it works now, at least it was last time I looked, there's 4 states. If you get pistol permits from 4 different states, you can carry anywhere in the country.
Oh, okay.
New York's one of them. I think Utah, Florida, Arizona, I think is the other. So if you have all 4 of those, which you can do legally, you can possess anywhere in the country.
Okay, all right, interesting.
What's fascinating to me though is so you've got things like sanctuary cities and legalized marijuana, which certain cities and states have legalized despite the federal government saying that you can't legalize those things. So now this is going to be interesting because now I think state or local officials may try to come in and enforce, getting rid of this person, or try to arrest somebody who's got a gun, but they're going to say, "Hey, listen, this is federal law."
Right, and that's I think part of that I think you'll see is and I said this to you many times before when we talk about
that would be
guns.
considered that would be considered different than the marijuana thing. That would be considered more of a protest.
Yeah, because they're turning their head to the law.
The same
basically.
type of protest you're getting with the sanctuary cities. I wouldn't compare it to the marijuana thing. Marijuana could be compared to gambling, where it is legal in certain states but not legal federally. The same type of thing. Kind of gambling is legal federally but not legal in some states. So that kind of push and shove goes there. But when it comes to this, the reason they're passing this legislation is to require states to allow the permits concealed carry, right?
Right. And again, I go back to I think in theory it's a great idea. But and I've said this to you many times, guns is a perfect example of where you have both sides of the aisle politically, that there are many within both sides, both Democratic and Republican parties, that are very entrenched in their thoughts. And let's be honest, there's a lot of money that flows in on this gun issue, both for and against. My perspective is, at least in this, something that's as important as this, something that's the Second Amendment that is, important, obviously can be dangerous as well, that you got to leave the money. I mean, do the right thing, because you got these, and I don't want to pick on one particular politician, but if you're so entrenched in your thoughts that you're not willing to listen to another perspective on this and you just say, nope, we should have guns, everybody should have guns. Well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Or I'm totally against it, nobody should get it. You can't have that.
Should a city like New York have the ability to say, listen, we're opting out of this? Do you feel that, based on your law enforcement experience, do you feel that concealed permits, concealed weapons in New York City is a good idea?
Probably not. And again, I go back to there's a lot of other factors too. Yeah. So every state's use of force is a little different. So again, Florida, because the Trayvon Martin thing just became very well known, is the stand your ground rule, which many states have. New York does not have. So in New York State, if you're confronted with violence, you must make every attempt to flee that violence, to try to get away from it. Florida's not like that. It's stand your ground, which means somebody comes at you, you have the right to defend yourself. So now when you go to every state, if you carry a gun, you got to know what the rules are in that state.
Yeah, or
else you're going to get charged with murder.
Here's the other problem: the Supreme Court has really already ruled on this, and
it's going to pass.
And it'll pass, which means it's going to end up at the Supreme Court, most likely. I would suspect.
And I think the Supreme Court is going to pass it as well.
I don't know. Well, depending on where the Supreme Court is now, but the Supreme Court has already ruled that our Second Amendment rights stop at your door. That you have the right to a weapon,
right?
But that is for protecting your home,
right? But that's not what they're ruling here. They're basically what I think they're going to rule on. You're talking about the stand your ground.
No, not stand your ground. This Second Amendment is going to get challenged
at some point down the road, probably,
in the Supreme Court. But what I'm saying is the Supreme Court has already ruled on it and ruled that you have the right to the Second Amendment gives you the right to have a gun, but that is basically stops at your property line.
That's right.
So it does not give you the right, currently, the Supreme Court ruled, it does not give you the right to take that gun and cross state lines, necessarily.
Right.
You said
so. I just wonder what this Supreme Court will do, because it's a little more conservative than it was.
Well, I think if the law gets passed as far as the reciprocity from state to state, I don't, unless a state challenges it.
You don't think Cuomo will challenge this, or somebody in New York will challenge
it? I can already see the press release from Schneiderman's office
right now. I think this will get challenged.
Well, I think probably where their argument would be is the sovereignty of the states.
It would have to be right. States states' rights. Isn't it interesting how all of a sudden the left will be arguing states' rights? It's kind of fun.
And let me ask you on that. You said in theory this is a good idea.
Right.
Shouldn't there be a national standard then?
That's my point. Is I think that if you had every state following, so they want
that ain't ever going to
people
happen.
want to compare it to a driver's license. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could because they compare it to a driver's license. But in every single state, you have to pass a written test and a practical test. That's simple. Now, every state gets to sort of tailor their tests, but they're all pretty much very similar. I think if you had something like that in place that said, okay, you have to take this safety course, 8 hours, 16 hours, whatever the course is, and then you have to show proficiency with the weapon itself.
Yeah.
Then here you go. Here's your 2 certificates. You can get your permit, and then you're good to carry it.
There'd be basically a national permit.
Right. And the other theory is, okay, so let's look at New York State. Let's say this passes next week. Now it's law. You have a permit in New York State, and I've already told you it's hard to get a concealed carry permit in New York State. Yours is for hunting and fishing or target practice. Now you have that permit in your hand. There is a process in which someone from another state that's easy to get a concealed carry could come here, carry legally, concealed carry. You, even though you're a pistol permit holder, cannot because your restriction is hunting and fishing.
Right.
So I think that
we're a more restricted state. So
absolutely more restricted.
And harder to get a permit probably here than in other places.
Way harder because many states are. You just have to prove that you're not in that class that can't carry them, and you get one.
I got about 45 seconds, but maybe we'll double that. Tim in Utica, pipe in here.
Yes. First of all, there are a number of states that don't require you. Vermont is right on our border.
What is going on?
I am losing you there for some reason. Is somebody dialing? I think Davey's dialing on me here.
No, he's talking. What's going on?
Okay, try that again there, Tim. Vermont does not require a permit for a concealed permit?
There's a bunch of states out in the heartland. They're basically rural type of states out in the heartland of the country where you don't have to have a permit.
Okay.
So how do you deal with that?
They wouldn't.
My doesn't require me to have a pistol.
I got a bad line on you, Tim, but I'm going to have Steve handle that.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to carry nationally because you'd have to have a concealed carry permit.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Tom in New Hartford, what do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in the New York City's ultra-restrictive pistol laws are racist. They were set up by Police Chief Sullivan, an Irishman like me, who wanted to keep the pistols out of the hands of Italians. So they set up the Sullivan laws down there specifically through Tammany Hall to keep pistols out of the hands of the Italians. Well, you see how well that worked out, right, with the mafia. Okay, and right now across the country there are a lot of cities and states that are raising the pistol permit application fees and permit fees and effectively taking self-protection out of the hands of poor blacks and poor whites. And that's also a racist thing. So we've got to be watching this very, very carefully. And the Second Amendment is not subject or should not be subject to elimination by states. It's not a real states' rights matter ethically, and it shouldn't be legally. But well,
the Supreme Court ruled that you're not by having a ban on pistols in New York City or handguns in New York City. The Supreme Court ruled that that's not in violation of the Second Amendment. Now, if it gets challenged again, I wonder what this Supreme Court would do. Well, or a potentially more conservative Supreme Court under President Trump, which, one of these guys is going to die sooner or later.
Well, some of the more intense people on the side of the I hate to pick on the NRA, but that believe that the Second Amendment means you don't need a permit to carry a gun because it's in the Constitution. That's just not the way it works.
That's why I'm saying this is not going to be an easy.
Not the way it works.
This will not be an easy process making this thing go forward. It's going to be very interesting because when you try to even say to these states that don't require a permit, you now have to require a permit
unless you just want to stay within the state.
Stay within the state.
But again, I think it could work because I have many friends who are not law enforcement that have pistol permits who are law-abiding citizens who are careful with their guns.
I think you'd be very surprised when you're in a facility, you're in even a restaurant or a bar, you'd be very surprised the number of people that have a concealed weapon.
Well, I was
in New York State.
I was in Texas for the hurricane, as you know.
You would not be surprised in Texas.
In Texas just changed their law recently so New York State it has to be concealed.
Right.
Well, in Texas it has to be on the outside.
I saw one of the bartenders or waiters in the story on 60 Minutes the other night was a very attractive female waitress that was walking around with her tight jeans, and that pistol was right there on her hip.
Yeah.
There.
Well, I
I
walked into a barbecue place. It was really funny because I walked in and everybody had guns. I mean, every single person had guns. So I went back to the hotel and I saw a buddy of mine and I said, geez, a bunch of cops go to this place. Must be a good place to eat. He goes, no, everybody has guns out here.
Yeah.
They're all wearing them on the outside. He goes, yeah, that's the new law.
That's the law.
It was peculiar. I went into Walmart and it was like,
It's almost like don't tread on me.
Yeah,
Right?
it is.
Don't mess with
me.
me.
It's
All right.
definitely different, though.
Interesting, and this is going to happen quickly. We could see this go into up for a vote here very soon.
And don't be surprised if you see it signed in.
All right. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.